I'm going to show you how to spawn a mob into a multiplayer game so that those mobs are synchronized from the server to the clients. However, I'm going to be building off a base project that I've already demonstrated and covered in a previous video, and I made that project available for everybody. So if you want, go grab that base project now so that you can follow along and build upon the logic that I'm going to show you today. Right now I have this mob scene created. So if we go under scenes here over on the left panel and characters, you'll see I added a mob scene, and I just kind of stubbed out some beginning things like the collision shape. Let's go ahead and pull them up. So it's just like a basic capsule there for his collision shape. And I also added in a animation player that has the skeleton and everything for that mob. You can use whatever animation or whatever model that you want. I just used the ones off Mixamo. So I just grabbed one of them and made a few animations. Like you can see, I have walking and idle and running and that sort of thing. And when you use things like walking, make sure to come over here and select this animation looping thing, because you don't want him to just do one animation and stop. So things like walking or idle or running, make sure to go over there and select that. So once you've got that set up, I've basically, you drag over this GLB object underneath this model thing, and then you just make local, you right click and hit make local, and it spits out these two things. And then I just kind of move them out at the parent level of this model. So that's really all that setup is. I've kind of covered this in some other videos just for the regular first person player setup. So if you want, go check those out. So after you have the animation player set up, if you look under, I created a animation tree. You can just go new child resource animation tree. You drag over the animation player as a parameter for this animation tree, just drag it over here. And what you want to do up here is create a animation node state machine. And that's going to create this basic console down here. So I had to add 3 animations: walking, idle, and zombie. And you just click this add animation and just select whatever animation you want. And then to connect them, you hit this little connector and you just drag from start to idle. And then each state in this example is just going to have 2 transitions between each state. And if you click on them from start to idle, you come over to the advanced tab and just type in idle. And then for walking, you do walk, running, you do run. And then going back to each state, it's just the inverse. So walk, idle, and idle back again here. And so that's just basically saying from any state from idle, you can go to a walk, you can go from a walk to a run, or a run back to idle, or a run back to walk, and so on and so forth. So you can have more animations built into this character, but these are the 3 that I'm going to be using for this demo. I'm really probably going to just use idle and running, but we'll get to that in a minute. So these are the 3 states that we're going to have for our mob, and these are animation states. So if I click on the animation tree, and if we look under, if we hit run, he'll start running, and you can see it's running in place. I'm not using root motion for this. This is just like a velocity based animation. And then if you want to hit walk, he'll just walk like that. And of course, idle will be his idle. And once you have the animation tree and player set up, you will have to make some script adjustments to apply those animations, but we'll look at those in a minute. What I want to do is just continue on and build out the rest of this mob scene so we can finish up this enemy. And when I created the actual mob itself, I went ahead and created a mob script that's down here underneath this scripts folder, but it is attached to this mob. And it's just a basic 3D character. I did name it the class name mob so that we can reference that and when we're like doing collision detection and that sort of thing to make sure that it is detecting a mob or not some other object. This is just the default 3D character body. We're going to look at changing this up in a minute. And if we just want to review really quick, here's where the model was that I copied it from. We don't need that anymore. And here is the character mob scenes, and we don't need to look at that anymore. So let's move on to building out the rest of this mob scene. The next thing we'll do is add a synchronizer. This is a multiplayer synchronizer. So this is going to let us show the zombie or whatever mob you have moving between the server that gets synced to the clients. So let's look at that synchronizer. Let's just name it mob synchronizer. And let's also create a script for that. We'll just call it mob synchronizer. and we don't want to put it there. So make sure you change it to the path that you want to put it, which I'll just stick it in the scripts. Now you can create subfolders in this script directory if you like to organize them, but I'm going to start really basic first. And then if this gets a little complex, then I'll go ahead and refactor these folder structures. So that's up to you. I'll go ahead and hit create. So now we have a mob synchronizer script linked to this mob synchronizer, and I'm gonna show you in a minute what fields we need to replicate, but I just want to wrap up this scene object over here. We'll also need a area 3D, and the area 3D is going to help us detect when a mob is near the player, because for this example, once the player is near a mob in this activation area, he's going to start running after that player. So let's call this activation area. And then inside there, we'll need a collision 3D, and we'll just call this activation boundary. Okay, and then up here, I think we want to create a sphere. You can probably create a cylinder because let's go ahead and just do it. So this game is just like a flat map. So if you look at the map itself, it's just a flat ground for now. But if you had hills and that sort of thing, and you still wanted the mob to activate, even though he was above you, if you use like a box or a cylinder, you're not going to get that three-dimensional because the cylinder is just flat on the bottom unless you make it really huge. So I would recommend doing a sphere in that case. But for this example, because everything's on a flat surface, we can just get away with using that cylinder. So if we come back over to the mob and we'll look at this, let's just create a cylinder shape. And because I played around with this a little earlier, I know what fields I want to add. So we'll do the height at 5 meters and a 20 meter radius. So it's basically going to be a 40 meter activation area, so that if a player gets within that activation boundary that we set here, the cylinder shape. So you can see as I zoom out here, this big giant, cylinder circle here. If a player comes inside that, he will be activated, and we're going to set up that script, and then he's going to start chasing after the player. So we're going to look at that in just a minute. Okay, so I think we've pretty much got the scene wrapped up for now. So let's go ahead and finish out the mob script. So the point of this script is to provide a starting point for this mob. So it's not going to be very complicated. If he has a target player, he's going to just start running towards that player. And then if the player somehow outruns him, then he's just going to stop dead. So this is a really basic starting point to spawn and chase after a player. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to set some fields up here at the top. We're going to change speed to mob walk speed, and we're going to just leave that at 5. And we just need to add a enum to capture our animations. Okay, and then we're going to also export our current animation. So the default animation we'll just set to idle. So when the character loads or when the mob loads, he drops in, and the first thing he does is just go to that idle animation. And we've got our gravity. So this target player is going to be set when the player moves into the activation area, and we're also going to track the target player position so the mob knows where to run to. And of course, we have an orientation variable that we're going to use to rotate and move the player or the mob to look at that player. So we just initialize our orientation field, and down here we want to set a process to false if we're not the server. So what we want to do here is if we're not on the server, so if we're on a client, we don't want to run the process function. So let's go ahead and just add that process function. So this is one of those built-in functions that the Godot nodes will have by default. That gets ran every frame, and basically we're going to check if a target player is null. We want to stop chasing after them. So that's all this check is going to do, and we're not going to have that check on the client. That's going to only be on the server side. So the server is going to have that authority to stop the mob from chasing after the player or not. That's not going to be on a client side. So if we have a target player, we're gonna just update the target player position, and then we're gonna use that position to move the mob towards that player. Okay, so let's add a helper method here. So when we actually establish a target player, we're going to go ahead and set the player that's passed in. So the mob will actually encounter, we're going to do that over in the synchronizer script that we created earlier. He's going to call back to the set target player. And now the mob script is aware of our target player. And then we're going to immediately set that first target player position. So as soon as that mob is aware, we want to just set that position. And then from then on out, the process will take over and make sure that that target player position is updated, right? Because the player is going to be moving around on the map. So we constantly need to be able to track his position. So that's what that's going to do. We don't really need any of this. Okay, so what we've just done here is if we're on the server, we're gonna go ahead and move the mob. But if we're not on the server, we're gonna go ahead and animate the mob. So this is basically client-side actions and server-side actions respectively. And of course, we don't have either of these functions, so let's go ahead and create them. Okay, so the apply movement, which is gonna be a server authority, will track and check if the target player exists. And if it does, we're going to turn that mob and look at the player. And then we're going to apply a velocity to that mob so that it chases after the player. So let's see how to do that. Okay, so let's review really quick. So in the apply movement function, we have a check here that says if our target player is not equal null. So if our mob has a target player, we're going to use this handy look at function to look at that player's origin. And of course, we're going to use the vector up as up. So he's not going to like lean forward or back. So this is going to spin that mob towards the player. And then if he's on the floor, so if he's able to run, we're going to go ahead and get the player direction, which is just we're going to use this handy little direction to function, which returns a normalized vector pointing from this vector to another vector. So this is a nice little tool to get a vector between two vectors. So we're going to use that player direction, and then we're going to multiply the walk speed, and that's going to be our velocity. And then we're going to set the direction up again, just to make sure that he's not going to lean forward. And we're going to apply the run animation because he is running. Otherwise, if he doesn't have a target, we're gonna move the velocity down to 0, and then we're gonna set the animation to idle because he's just gonna be sitting there. And we're gonna apply that move and slide, which is actually how we stop or move that player based on the velocity, that mob, I mean. Now you may want to refactor how you slow the mobs down. I'm just gonna stop them in place. So as soon as you get out of that activation range, that mob is just gonna stop dead in its tracks. Now you might want to have him go back somewhere and do some more logic. However, I think that maybe this isn't the best way to do this. Again, this is just like a base. Eventually we're going to look at the navigation region and navigation agent 3D and probably look at a better way to handle this. So this is just a starting point so that you can get your mobs in the game and have some fun with them chasing you when you're playing around. And then the last thing we're going to do is build out this animation function. So if we just set the current animation to what's passed in, and what we'll do down here is build out our different states and apply those animations respectively. I don't want to type all this out because I have a pretty good idea. So let me just paste it in here and then we can review it together. Okay, so these conditionals will determine which animation we're going to apply to the mob. And you can see it's pretty straightforward. If it's walk, we set false to the states of idle and run so that we set walk to true. And if it's run, you set idle and walk to false and set the run to true. Now there's probably a better way to do this, but for this simple example, it really gets it done. You can see I have this die animation in here. I'm not going to look at that today. We probably don't even need that in here. I don't want to confuse anybody. So we could probably delete that. I'm just going to leave it for now, but and it's probably not even the right way to do a death scene with this state. So there might be another way to do that. So we'll just look at that some other time. But at the very end, you can see we'll just default to the idle animation. If none of these animations hold true, then we'll just go ahead and make that zombie just sit there and idle. Okay. So that's pretty much it for our script. I may have missed something, but let's just go ahead and finish out the mob synchronization side of things. And what we'll do is we'll come over to this area of activation. And I believe what we want to do is connect these body entered and body exited signals to respective functions over here. Okay, so we don't need those right now. So let's just go ahead and establish the mob object. We want to get a handle on the mob itself. And let's build out those on body entered and exit functions respectively. And once we have those stubbed out, we can actually come back over to this activation area, hit the node tab, and for body entered, we're gonna go ahead and select that mob synchronizer, and we'll pick on body entered, connect it, great. Body exited, do the same thing, pick and exited, great, okay. Okay, so when the body is entered, if we don't have if this mob is not in the tree, or if we don't have a multiplayer peer, like if for some reason our network is shut down and if we're not an authority, right? So if we're not a server, we just want to ignore this. We don't want the clients to be messing with this. This needs to be a server authority function, and this is the best way to do that. And then if the body that is collided with this mob is a player, right? So if you look over the player script, pull that open really quick. You can see we have that player class name up there. So if it is a player, if it's the type player, I'll just go ahead and print a little debug statement so we know that the script is working. We'll go ahead and set that body to using that set target player function that we just created right here. So that's gonna call back to that, and it's gonna set the player target so that the mob knows who to chase. So that's how we start chasing after the player. So let's cancel that when they exit the area. So we'll just basically do the same thing. We'll just copy this over here. And we'll just do the inverse of that. We could probably just call in the same way and just say null. And that should call back to that and set this to null. And therefore, if, I guess, I'm wondering if maybe that's not the best way to do that, because if you pass a null here, this is going to throw a null pointer. So maybe we should just add a null check around this. And then we'll go ahead and add that. So that might be an improvement. I haven't tested that, so I just thought of that really quickly here. So I just wanted to reuse that function. So that should get our area of activation working when the player enters the space or area of the mob. Okay, so now what we need to do is make sure that our zombies or our mobs or whatever you're using is going to actually show up when the game or level loads. So in this demo game, what happens is let's go ahead and just run it, make sure I didn't break anything. Okay, so when you hit start server or host, it automatically loads you into the game. So right now, when you hit that, I just drop in. And this is the base project that you'll get. It might vary. I don't know if I have these columns in it, but basically it's just this character controller in 3D where you can just kind of run around. It's got a little jump animation and walk and idle and that sort of thing. So that's great. So what we want to do is when this map spawns in, remember we had that scene from the other videos. If we come back over to the gameplay scene, that whole level gets spawned right into this map node. And when that level gets over, or maybe you wanted to move the player to another level, you could close that scene that gets spawned into this node and then put in another scene, and you can use this map spawner. Like you can see right here, I have map 1. Now you can have map 2, map 3, map 4, or level 1, 2, 3, or 4, and you can add that to this auto spawn list here. And I also have a game over scene, and I reviewed all this in detail in the base project review, so I'm not gonna go over that again today. But so once that map is spawned into this gameplay scene, the map needs to load the mobs into the game. So let's look at how to do that really quick. So in this ready function, and this is going to be server side, right? So if not server, we just return. So if it's client side, we don't do this. This is all server authority. So we just come down here and we're going to create a function, and then we're going to call it from here so that the mobs will get spawned into the game. So we'll go ahead and spawn 10 mobs. And I just wanted to capture the scene so we can use it easily. And we also need to create this spawn mobs function. And I basically can copy this down here. So let's go ahead and just kind of grab what we did for the player sign, and we'll just move it up here and use it for the mob. And instead of players, we need to add, oh, so that's one more thing that I may have forgot about is over in our map, we have a players placeholder where our multiplayer spawner goes, but we also need to add a mob spawner and a mob placeholder. So let's go ahead and do that really quick, or else I'm gonna get myself into trouble here. So let's hit to do so I don't forget. And we'll go over here and add mobs. Nope, we're gonna do 3D. There's no mob node. Okay, and we'll call it mobs. And then of course we need to add the mob spawner. So that's just a multiplayer spawner, and that we'll rename to mob spawner. And to set this up really quick, what we need to do over here is where is the path? So where are these mob spawners gonna go? They're gonna go in this mobs node right here. And what we also need to do is set a limit. So I'm just gonna set it to 50 because I'm gonna do 10 for now, but it could be larger. And then you also need to add a what you want to auto spawn. So we're gonna auto spawn a scene, which is if we look under characters, it's gonna be the mob. So it's gonna be the mob scene that we're gonna do. And now that we have that, what we can do is instead of what that was before, which was players, we can just drag over the mobs object. So we're gonna add child and we're gonna add character, but instead of character, because I copied and pasted, we're gonna just change it to mob. Oh, and like I have this ID. We don't really care too much about the IDs because it's not our players. I just use whatever random X coordinate we got, and that's gonna be our mob ID. Just kind of a little like hack. You may want to do something more meaningful, but this gets the job done. And I'm also gonna adjust these to between 5 and 50 to get them spread out over the map. So it's gonna have a different spawn location. And again, you can play around with this as much as you want to fit your game's needs. So we call this mob spawn from our ready function, and then we loop through the amount that we pass in, which in this case will be 10. We instantiate our mob scene. We create a random location for him to drop in, and we apply that position and we give it a name, like I said before, based on this random X. Again, it's not very important. And then we add that child, this new mob that we created, to this mobs node over here. So we do that for the total count of mobs that we wanted to create. And when this spawner detects that something's been added over here, it will auto spawn and synchronize to the other clients or other peers connected to the game. Okay, so I think we've got our map set up. I think we've got our mob spawned in, and we've also got our mob script set up completely. We've got our movement controls and our animations for that mob and the movement and gravity and that sort of thing. Okay, so I think we're ready for a test. So let's go ahead and run this right now and see where we're at. Start our server, start our host up, and yep, he drops in, and you can see the zombies or the mobs are actually targeting this player as they enter in the activation area. So if I run over here and I get close enough, he'll turn and start running at me. But one thing you'll notice is they're all running backwards. So let's see what's going on with that. So I think if we go over to the mob scene and we select the model, let's go ahead and rotate that model 180 degrees. And just to get him correctly oriented for our game setup. Now, you might not need to do that. Maybe your game is set up differently, or maybe my movement logic has a negative sign somewhere where you don't. So you might have to just play around with that, but let's just go ahead and see if that fixed it. And I'm dropping in now, and yeah, it looks like all these mobs are getting in. I'm getting into their area of activation, which triggers them to start targeting me. And then if I run away from them, let's go ahead and keep running and see if they'll all stop once I leave that area. Yep, and as you can see down there, body exited, all printed out, and they all stopped. Now, you can set up and do whatever edits you want to, or whatever adjustments you want to have the desired behavior of these mobs when they leave the area, but I think we're gonna look at that more once we get into the navigation region stuff in the next few videos. Okay, so let's see what this looks like with a second player in the game. Let's go ahead and add a couple instances, and let's run this again. Before we run this, I just wanted to mention really quick that we haven't actually filled out the replication properties that need to be put here. So what do you think is gonna happen when we run this? So here's the server authority and all the mobs are there. And what's gonna happen when we run that player 2 client script? Let's go ahead and run that. So as you'll notice, there are no zombies showing up. There are no mobs showing up here. You can tell he's being affected by it. Like there's some jitter. He's actually running into the mobs, and you can see them actually replicated on the server node at the top over here on the left. And then I'll actually be able to pull aggro off of him, which is a little interesting. That wasn't really an expected behavior, but you can see that there are no mobs in the second peer, the second client connected down there. So we need to go ahead and add in those replication fields so that we can see the mobs as they should be showing up. So let's go ahead and add those now. Okay, so we went ahead and added all the replication properties needed to correctly sync and show the player's movement, or the mob's movement, speed, direction, and animation, and that sort of thing. So, and through experimentation, I know that we don't need the current animation or the target player or his position when the mob spawns. We may not need any of these, but I know for sure that these last three aren't required, and you can adjust these based on your game's requirements after some experimentation. So let's go ahead and close that as I think we're ready. So we'll go ahead and run it again, and you can see him running around a little bit. And let's go ahead and drop in the client. And now you can see that the mobs are chasing after him. So if I go over here, you can actually see the mobs synchronizing and chasing after the player 2 object. Now you can notice that, well, you can see that they're correctly synced, but I'm pulling aggro. So once one player goes into the area of activation, it seems to pull it off the other one. And if the area of activation is left through either player, you know, I'm close enough to this guy, he should be chasing after me, but because he left the player 2's area of activation, it's causing him to not chase anybody. So, you know, that all depends on your requirements if this is a desired gameplay effect or not, but I kind of want this to play a little cleaner. So let's look at how to fix that. So how do we get the mobs to not de-aggro once they're already chasing a specific player? So I think if we go under the mob synchronization script, we can add in a couple properties to help us with that. Yeah, and the first thing we'll do is let's add a mob target ID. So this is going to be the player target that the mob is going to be chasing. So what we want to do is check. So if a player enters the activation area, we want to see, does this mob already have a player target? Is he already chasing somebody? So if he's not already chasing somebody, let's go ahead and chase that player. And I think we're using the body.player. Whoops, I meant to say equals. So our mob's target will be the player's player ID. And if you look at that player script again really quick, you can see that I use this player field to actually capture the player's ID. So this mob, if a player enters his activation area and he's not already chasing somebody, we'll go ahead and set his target to the player that entered the area. So we need to kind of do the inverse of that on when player exits. So down here, if a mob exits a player and it's the one he's chasing, so we need to make sure that it's actually the one he's chasing. So we'll do player.body. And if it's the one he's chasing, well, then we need to go ahead and set that target ID to null, because he's no longer going to be chasing anybody. And I think that should do it. So when a player enters a mob activation, if he's already chasing somebody, meaning if this isn't null, then he's just going to ignore that other player that entered that area, and he's going to keep chasing after the one he's already targeting. But if he doesn't have a target, then he will begin to chase him. And then the same thing down here, but the inverse, if a player exits his area and it's the one he was actually chasing, then he'll go ahead and stop chasing him. Otherwise, he just ignores it. So let's go ahead and run this and see if this fixed it. So we're looking to make sure that they don't aggro when running by. Yeah, and you can see here, I dropped in and they're not aggroing. So now this guy aggroed on me because that makes sense. And now if you look back over the player 1, the original server guy, he's getting bombarded right now. He's like, yeah, these are like physical collision guys and I'm having trouble actually getting out of there. But like you can tell that if I run by with this other guy, he's not actually going to aggro those mobs. They're going to still stay on that player. There seems to be a little bug right there where they're just stuck in the T-pose. Let's check that out in a second. I just want to make sure we do one bug at a time. Let's see if I can move out. Yeah, I'm like totally stuck in here. Let's like rerun this because that's not a very good test. Do server host. And let's just aggro a couple guys and you'll see them over here. And then let's drop in player 2. Player 2 falls in, as you saw there in the background. and he's not aggroing anybody. Now, if I leave that area of activation and the old code, he would actually run away from this guy, but he didn't. So that's a good sign. Let's go ahead and see if we run them by the other player, if he'll aggro. He shouldn't be aggroing. They have T poses. That's not very good. Let's see, did they didn't aggro, so they're still chasing after me. I think they just ran into the other player. So I think we've got that fixed. Let's just look at player 2 and see if he aggroes any of these guys. Yeah, I think we've got it. I think we've got it figured out. Great. Okay, so I think we've got that aggro thing figured out. So let's figure out why these guys were going into T-pose mode. I'm curious why that's happening. What do you guys think? So after some investigation, if you look under the animation tree and select this transition from the start node, I actually had a condition for idle. We don't want to do that. We want it to just automatically go into that first idle animation state. So go ahead and remove that if that comes in the project. That's got to be a correction that I need to add. I think that'll fix it. So let's just make sure. Okay, and I'll start the second player. And yeah, you can see there. I don't see any T poses right there. That looks good to me. And you can see the zombies are already chasing me. And if I switch over to the initial player, player 1, he can just jump around in here. Wow, these guys are really tough. Yeah, that's some funny physics going on here. But yeah, as you can see, this chase logic works great. It's really simple. It's really basic. I think the next step is to look at navigation agent and navigation region and use that for how our mobs chase after people. So this is a little bit, of a base rudimentary kind of setup. So I think we're going to build off of this and explore the next step in the evolution. So if you haven't already, go pick up that base project out there. I'll link it below. And then this video is built on top of that. And then I'm going to build any subsequent videos off of that project. So we're going to do iterative steps along the way to show how all these different things come together. And so right now this is great. We've got our enemy spawn, we've got our enemy chasing and sync across the multiplayer environment. And I don't see any reason why you wouldn't be able to use this for a 2D game. The synchronizer and the spawn tools will work regardless of your game type. So if you have a 2D game, you would just, have node 2Ds instead of node 3Ds, and that should work just as well. And if you have any questions or comments or anything, make sure to comment below, or you can also join the Discord and we'll hash it out together. And, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to give it a like. And I've got a lot more videos on the way, and I'm definitely going to dive into navigation region, and I'll probably do a series of videos on those. And I'm going to start basic and definitely do this video because I'm going to build off this video. Like, I'm going to have this mob scene ready to go. So for that next video, you're going to want to have it ready. You're going to want to go through this process and get those mobs spawned into the map, just like I've got it done here. So make sure you're subscribed. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, and thanks for watching.